And you'll have plenty of time to ask questions because I know you're all dying to ask our panellists all about the elections this week. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Beside me we've got Lewis. Lewis Baston is our expert political analyst this afternoon. He's a writer and commentator on all things elections and politics, as well as a contributing editor to Progress magazine. Over to you, Lewis.
Well, thank you, Marian, and thank you very much for having me here. My expertise, such as it is in elections, and it's that stage of an election campaign, an election count and analysis where I can see a lot of sort of the woods. The picture of the woods is starting to become clear from all the trees that I've been looking at in detail. And I can talk a bit about the results. I mean, the results were, I think, disappointing in most cases, partly because expectations had run so high. There is, I think, in most of the rest of the country outside London, there was a small slippage from elections of 2014 and 2016, both of which were what you sort of in the election business tend to think of as an even year, where the two main parties are more or less level with each other. 2018 was still sort of more or less in that territory, but so far as I've seen, in most areas, the Conservatives did slightly better. And a lot of that has to do with the collapse of the UKIP vote. There was a correlation between swing to Conservative and the size of the UKIP vote that was disappearing and the share of the vote for Leave in the referendum. So we lost out to the Conservatives a bit on that side of the ledger. We also, in many areas, including inside London, ended up sort of leaching votes either from Labour or votes we could have had gained from the Conservatives to the Lib Dems and the Greens. It was very noticeable that there were some boroughs where the Conservatives got massacred by Remain voting socially liberal electors, and those were Richmond and Kingston, and our own Hammersmith and Fulham to some extent. Which was an astonishing Labour result on top of an astonishing Labour result in 2014. And obviously Trafford, which we'll hear more about in due course. What can we learn from local government? I don't want to go too far off my electoral beat, but there are things in terms of election campaigning that Labour and local government does very well. I think the sort of relationships that Labour councillors have built with their electors, I'll single out again Hammersmith and Fulham and Trafford, because some of these areas are not sort of what you think of as natural Labour territory. You've really got to work with it, build relationships with the voters who may not be on your side for any tribal reasons at all. The other things I would point to are how to do stuff when you don't have any money. I mean, that local government has been a huge kind of factory of ideas for that in recent years. How to deliver public services efficiently, and that can be in-housed or out-housed. I mean, authorities such as Liverpool have already been doing a lot with taking things in-house. This isn't necessarily a kind of factional thing. And also, leadership, I think, is something that Labour can learn a lot from local government. Having kind of, without any money, a lot of local leadership seems to be about kind of building networks, making places, and we've got some of the best people in politics in the country, I think, who are engaged in just this work, and precious little thanks, I think, they get for it from a lot of places. And I think there's also sort of managing party unity as well is something that our local government, not every local government Labour group is a model of harmony and sweetness, I realise, but there has been an effort over many years to bring people along, create unity in a lot of local authorities, many of whom also now have to deal with a second four-year term of near monopoly representation in London. I mean, there are several local authorities where the opposition is basically nominal. That may not be a problem we suffer from nationally for some time, but still, in terms of unity, delivery, leadership, there's a lot that we can learn from local government, and I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues about just that.
Thank you. Next up, to the other side of me, is now former Councillor Adam Langleben, who's from Barnet. I'm sure you probably heard the results in Barnet. It was an incredibly disappointing night for the Labour Party. So I'll leave Adam to tell us more about Barnet and what we can do.
Hi everyone, this is actually my first ever Progress event, so thank you for having me. There you go. Let me start with a story. 5 nights ago now, I was out canvassing in High Barnet, which is one of our target wards that we had to try to win the council, with Arjun, who's sitting just there, who's running the board, and unfortunately I left him for half an hour because I knocked on a door with a mezuzah on it, a Jewish holy scripture in the top right-hand corner. And the woman who answered the door, she answered it, and she looked at my red rosette, and she just burst into tears. And she's like weeping and crying to me. And she said, my family were involved in the Jewish Tailors Union in Leeds. I voted Labour my entire life, but I'm sorry, I just can't do it this Thursday. Because for me, voting Labour this Thursday is a vote for endorsing racism. And High Barnet, 2 nights ago, or yesterday morning even, we lost by 1 vote. Okay? In High Barnet, you've got about 4% Jewish population, so you're talking about hundreds. And as people in this room will know, Jewish people have lots of opinions, and broadly speaking, politically, the Jewish community is split. So without a doubt, in that ward, we would have won if it wasn't for the current issues of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Equally, in East Barnet, we lost by dozens, 30 votes. Same thing goes there, 5% Jewish population in East Barnet. In Brunswick Park, which is neighbouring to that, also about 3 or 4% Jewish population. We lost there by dozens of votes again. And then we get onto my ward, West Hendon, which has been a Labour-held ward for 40 years. And we lost it, and it's got a 14% Jewish population, and it's got quite an observant population. And we lost my ward by around 100 votes on average. Thursday, the Jewish community in London, in Manchester, in Liverpool, sent a message to the Labour Party that we do not understand anti-Semitism. We are not dealing with anti-Semitism, and in fact we are the source of contemporary anti-Semitism in Britain. And that's to shame the entire Labour movement, and I'm talking to this room, but actually the entire Labour movement. So I'd be happy to give this talk to a group of people from Momentum as well. Everyone needs to hear this. The Jewish community believe the Labour Party are racist. And that is the only reason why we lost Barnet Council, because we ran an amazing campaign. We had a programme for the council that was considerably more radical than Haringey. Considerably. And we had enthusiasm for our programme. These same doors who were telling us they couldn't vote Labour, we got out the manifesto, which was amazing, and we showed them it, and they said, we love it. We love everything you're saying. We hate the council. This council has been outsourced to Capita. The potholes are not being filled. The council removed the inspectors to make sure the job is being done properly. The bins aren't being collected. They're making hundreds and hundreds of families homeless in Barnet through their botched regeneration projects. They're not building any affordable housing. And they've been in power for 16 years, and they were tired. But people couldn't vote for us. People would prefer that than risking a Labour council and risking that vote being seen as an endorsement for the Labour Party leadership, who as far as most people in the Jewish community are concerned, do not take this seriously. Now, I also help run the Jewish Labour movement, and we've been trying to talk to the Labour leadership about this now for 3 years, and we've been ignored. And even 3 weeks ago, I sent a message to Jeremy Corbyn's office, of which we've been having a conversation, a dialogue, for 3 years, and we told them the reaction we were getting. on the doorstep. And I should just say here, I have the utmost respect for anyone who's come to Barnet to knock on doors, because they have been the toughest doors this election to knock on. Anyone who's knocked on doors in Barnet will have had people shouting at them and screaming at them, and all because we're perceived to be racist. I've got nothing but admiration for everyone who came to help us. So if you did come, thank you very much. Going forward, there is no route to forming a Labour government without winning our 3 constituencies in Barnet. There is no route whatsoever. We have to win Hendon, we have to win Finchley and Golders Green, and we have to win Chipping Barnet. And on Thursday, we went backwards. So I think I'll leave it there and say the challenge is we have to, not only for electoral reasons, figure out how to fix, how to repair the soul of the Labour Party, but also because it's the right thing to do, and we cannot have any minority community in this country, whoever it is, to think that we, the Labour Party, the anti-racist Labour Party, are a bunch of racists.
Thank you very much for that, Adam. If we could go to Joanne next. Cllr Joanne Harding is from Trafford Council. She's the chair of the Health and Scrutiny Committee, works in mental health, and is also a member of the Progress Strategy Board. You may have already heard that Trafford Council we got some good news from, which went into no overall control from the Conservatives. So Joanne, would you like to tell us what went right for Trafford?
Okay, thank you very much, and I obviously am delighted with the outcome of Thursday's election, but make no mistake about it, we have an incredibly hard job and a hard task ahead of us, really. So fresh from the campaign trail, we've been in opposition since 2004, and it's grim being in opposition, but also at times it's easier being in opposition because actually we're not having to deliver these awful, dreadful cuts. And now we're going to be in a position in Trafford where we're going to have to make some very, very tough decisions. So it was a great campaign, and I just want to say, contrary to Owen Jones's worldview, it was not a People's Momentum campaign. It was a campaign that was hard fought and hard won by activists in Trafford from all over and all different stripes of the party. So I won't have it owned by People's Momentum, and I feel quite strongly about that, really. So the question that was put to me today was, is National Labour learning from local politics? In a word, no. I just want to say, being a councillor is a really tough job. I am really privileged to be in this position. I'm hugely honoured to be in this position, and I still pinch myself 7 years down the line that I have been given this huge responsibility to represent my community, the community that I love, that I live in the ward, I'm part of, rooted, my daughter goes to school there, but it's a tough ask, let me tell you. But I do feel there is a real disconnect with the front bench and what happens at local level. Some of the messages that come out from the front bench are very mixed and make it very difficult for us as local councillors to try and deliver what we're trying to deliver, really. Austerity has and is a dreadful policy choice that this Tory government have handed down to us at local government, and it's impacted massively on communities. I hold the shadow executive role for adult social care, and 40% of the care homes in Trafford are rated as inadequate or requiring improvement. That has a dreadful impact on those residents and families that are having to deal with adult social care. However, sadly, local government has very little choice sometimes when it comes to delivering. We are bound by constitution. We have to set legal budgets. There are things that we just have to do. And it doesn't help when we have shadow cabinet members or MPs saying that privatisation is bad or outsourcing is bad, speaking about the private sector as if they are, the crawling enemy. I think with better regulation, we have to have positive relationships with the private sector. We simply do have to do that. And Chris Williamson talking about outsourcing, and when he was leader of Derby Council, that's precisely what he did. And now all of a sudden, it's a toxic mess. So I think, you know, and also I have the utmost respect for Jonathan Ashworth. I sit on the National Policy Forum Health and Care Commission. But when Jonathan talks sometimes about privatisation in the health service, it's less than helpful at times. I manage a mental health crisis service which operates 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I know better than most the cuts that have impacted on mental health services. I see it day in, day out. But I work for a charity who has a contract with the CCG, and I have members in my CLP saying that we're a private provider. Well, frankly, that's bloody disgusting, because we as a charity are trying our best, and we work in collaboration and partnership with the NHS. So I just won't have that said, and I think that really this front bench and the National Party need to think very carefully about the messages that they put out there, really. We can't withdraw from private contracts. Do you know, we talk about adult social care, can we bring it all in-house? We can't. We simply can't. We can't afford to do it. We don't have the workforce to do it. There's a green paper coming out in the summer which we should all be contributing to as national and local politicians. And we should be fighting for better funding formulas and making sure that we've got a 10-year workforce strategy. So, I think really, I would say that I have a lot of respect for Andrew Gwynn, though, really, in local government. I think he actually gets it. He's been there in local government. He does understand, and Andrew does try to beat and bang the drum for us in local government. We need more of that, really. It was great to hear Richard give a shout out to local councillors. We need some more of that. We're trying our hardest in an awful climate against a backdrop of dreadful austerity. The other thing I would say about councillors, which I don't think is recognised, is that the majority of councillors I know have a full-time job, like myself. We cannot afford, I can't afford to give up my full-time job because the allowance is pitiful, frankly, but it's like having a second full-time job. So we're not the enemy. Don't set us up to fail. We need much more recognition and support from the National Party that we're all working together. Let's get those key messages all streamlined so that we're all fighting the same battle. As Claire Coghill said earlier, Labour really do need to listen to what the public are saying. And I think the reason we won Trafford, because Trafford is not naturally Labour, it's, you know, we're a wealthy, affluent borough. There's lots of Tory voters. The grammar school is one of the things that the Tory voters love in Trafford. But we listened to the public. Trafford Labour listened to the public. There were some community campaigns that we were rooted in. We were there, and they didn't see our political colours. They knew that we were listening and fighting for them, and that's what the National Party needs to do more of. Thanks.
Next up, we have Councillor Tom Beattie, who has been leader of Corby Council since 2011. Tom, can you tell us what National Party can learn from Corby?
Yes. Thank you, Marian, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation to Progress to come here today. Corby is one of those small towns that was mentioned in the previous session. It's one of those small towns that has a Labour-controlled authority. It has had a Labour-controlled authority since I moved there, as you probably guessed, from Northern Ireland in the early 1970s, and Corby has always had a Labour-controlled authority. But, however, we don't always have a Labour MP because of the nature of our constituency, which is split very much between the town of Corby and the rural hinterland of East North Hants. So we struggle as a marginal, but it is one of those seats that we need to win. It's one of those seats that if Labour's going to get into government, we have to win. Corby is a growing town. It has a population of around 70,000 now, with an ambition to get to 100,000 by 2030. And we set out on that journey some 15 or so years ago. And we have successfully, I believe, delivered for our residents in Corby. Corby's an ex-steel town. In the early 1980s, we suffered the catastrophic effects of the steel closure. The local steel plant for many years, Corby was a town which was held up as an example of decay, of a dying place where no one wanted to live or work or come to, that's changed, and that's changed dramatically. And I think, I have to say here again, I mean, sometimes when I listen to London-based friends, that are many of them, and activists, I think sometimes there is a misunderstanding about what happens outside of London. And even with the use of language, for instance, regeneration, to us in Corby, regeneration has been what we've achieved and what we're proud of. And yet in London, it appears to be, you know, an excuse for social cleansing. It appears to be an excuse for, you know, engaging with the private sector in a way that perhaps we shouldn't do. We wouldn't have been able to regenerate the town that we live in Corby without the help and the partnerships that we have with the private sector. So I'm quite happy to work with the private sector to make sure that those regeneration projects continue. But alongside that, for instance, we've recently, one of the first decisions taken when I was elected as a councillor in 2003 was to outsource our refuse collection service, our street scene service, and we gave it to Cllr. Now, I'm very proud to say that under my leadership, we're bringing that service back in-house as of next year. And we're partnering with a neighbouring borough to do that. So we're going to do a joint partnership with a borough next door. So at the same time as working with the private sector, we're also saying that Cllr has failed to deliver. It's failed to deliver the level of service, the efficiencies that we want, so we're bringing it back in-house. So it's not one or the other. It's not public good, private bad. It's getting the mixture right, and I think that's what Labour can learn from local politics, Labour heading towards government. Because some 18 months or so ago, I think now, Alison McGovern, the chair of Progress, did a tour of Britain. She met a few council leaders, including myself and Pete Marland from Milton Keynes. And Alison did a series of interviews around governing Britain. And we were talking about what that meant. Because if and when Labour gets into government nationally, there are very few people around that shadow cabinet table who will have any experience of government of any sort. And that's why I'm happy to support what Joanne said about Andrew Gwynn. I think our team in local government, at least the Data Shadow team, including, I have to say, Jim McMahon, who only a few years ago was the leader of the LGA Labour group, now the MP for Oldham, they understand local government in a way that others haven't done in the past. Now, I mean, what I would suggest is that let's be practical. I think I heard Claire Coghill talk about pragmatism and getting things done properly, not being hidebound by ideology, but finding out what solutions work and implementing those solutions. And let me give you an example very close to home. We have a failing county council. You're probably aware of Northamptonshire is the first council in the country to effectively be made bankrupt. You know, a Section 114 notice was issued, no more spending, apart from on essential services. Since then, a government inspector has come in and recommended that that council be wound up, but not just that that council be wound up, but the other 7 district and borough councils in Northamptonshire go with it, including mine, the only Labour-controlled authority in Northamptonshire. So we're facing the possibility of going into a unitary with 3 other councils that neighbour us, all Conservative-controlled. Now, it's almost a done deal. We've had a letter of invitation from the then Secretary of State, Sajid Javid. This is the way this works. You know, the Secretary of State doesn't have the power to impose a solution. But what he or she does have is the power to ask us to fix a problem that someone else has created. So in effect, he's written to all of the district and borough councils in Northamptonshire and said, bring forward proposals for unitary authorities, 2 of them, one in the north where I am and one in the west. And this is what we want the proposal to look like. And if it doesn't look like that, well, it's not going to work. And if you don't do it, the commissioners who we're going to appoint very shortly to run Northamptonshire County Council will do it for you. So that's the nature of democracy currently within the DCLG, or what it, MCHLG, I think I'm... MHCLG, thank you. They change the initials so often. But the reason I make that point is that Northamptonshire was held up a couple of years ago as an example of a council, a Tory council, which should be, you know, the inspiration for all others. It was a council that kept its council tax low. They've brought forward proposals for a next generation model, in effect outsourcing every single one of their services, reducing the existing workforce to a rump of about 150 people. And Eric Pickles at the time, when he was Secretary of State, said Northamptonshire is the way that they should all go. Well, that's the way they are all going, you know, and Northamptonshire is the first one to crumble. So what it is, it's a triumph of ideology over common sense. And I think that's what Labour needs to be aware of and not fall into the same trap. I used to, I've got a friend and colleague, Graham Chapman, some people might know, he's a deputy leader of Nottingham City Council. And Graham quite likes to introduce me at various events to people that I don't know as the man who's changing Corby. He's the man that's turning Corby from the great working class Labour voting town that it's always been into this new Tory area. And I had the great pleasure at the last election in 2015. We didn't have elections this year. We're all due for elections next year, but they won't happen because they're being suspended because of what's happened in Northamptonshire. But I had the great pleasure of pointing out to Graham Chapman that in the 2015 election, 24 out of 29 councillors in total were elected as Labour councillors. I lead the biggest Labour group in Corby for more than 25 years. And people in Corby vote for a Labour council because we've delivered. We've changed their lives for the better. We've changed the infrastructure of the town. We've delivered the things that we said we would do, and people will vote for that. And I think that's what Labour needs to be thinking about. They need to think about how we make that transition in government, how we actually react to what people's needs are. Listen to them. I listen to the people of the town where I live, and we respond to that. So practical solutions, working with partners, and the private sector. As I've said, you know, I'm quite happy to get my hands dirty if the case requires it, and go into those sorts of partnerships, because they are the things that have delivered for the people of Corby, and that's why they continue to vote Labour. Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, we have Cllr Khevyn Limbajee, who's the current Cabinet Member for Housing in the London Borough of Waltham Forest. And I understand you were comfortably re-elected yesterday. So could you please give us an overview of the housing issue, which is obviously quite pertinent at the moment?
Thank you, Marian. And it's a pleasure to follow everyone on this panel, because everyone, I agree with virtually everyone said. I think everyone's pointed to the failings and the successes of national Labour, and also of the successes of local government as well. The important thing, you know, as Cabinet for Housing, in Waltham Forest, like across London, there's a supply and demand issue. You've got homelessness. 2,400 families are homeless today in Waltham Forest that we have a statutory duty to house. We have 8,000 people on the housing waiting list. We have a private rented sector of 30,000 people living in our homes. You've got the highest increase in house prices in London, in Waltham Forest. So you have demographic changes, you've got people moving out, can't afford to stay there, people moving in, want to buy, and you have almost a perfect storm with you. So these are real problems that we as local councils have to face. And you know, problems and crises offer us a challenge, because problems aren't going to go away unless we solve them. Then another problem will come through. So the important thing as a councillor, and we as a council, as Claire would have said earlier, is about practical results. It's about flexibility. It's not being ideologically hidebound. It's actually looking at what works. And the barometer, I said, is whether it improves the lives of our residents. And that's an incredible barometer to do, because most people who don't go and protest want to get on, want to do well, and want the best things they can do. As coming for housing, in London right now, there's a lot of radical housing groups that will protest against all sorts of different things. The radical housing groups tend to be sort of homeowners, they tend to be older, they tend to have seen their homes inflated massively, and they will go and protest against all sorts of different things, from affordable homes not being built, to estate regeneration, to all sorts of different things that actually... But the actual people who I really like listening to are my council tenants, who can actually say to me, this is what we want to do, this is what we would like. We would like to have new bathrooms and kitchens. We'd like to innovate. We'd like you to get on. And they don't really have a voice. And so what I found, and I did get elected yesterday, with the majority, we might have officer groups and local Labour parties that are opposed to us and radical and against us, come from different political parties, from the Socialist Party, Left Unity, etc. But get down to beneath the real people who actually want to do stuff. They actually listen. And it's almost, I'm slightly veering off tangent right now, but it's almost a bit like the Reformation, where effectively you had a Catholic Church, you had officer groups in there, and actually, if you talk to ordinary people, talk to almost ordinary Labour members directly, there's a very, very, very different response you get. And I think that's very important. And I think, expanding on what was said before, it's about Labour in government having a theory of the state, if you like, having a theory of local government. And the theory of local government is, for me, it's an enabling state. It's actually to enable people to get on and do things. One thing, I don't necessarily believe in state ownership, though I have brought housing back in-house. It was owned by an Almo, it didn't work. So I brought it back in-house, it's a better service now. And that's because it works better that way. And it's not an ideological thing. If it worked better the other way, I'd be happy to work the way it was before in Alma. But it doesn't, so he brought it in-house. The one thing that the state can do is improve people's lives, not necessarily owning things. For example, we have 30,000 private rented homes in the borough. Before, we hadn't a clue how many homes there were. We didn't have standards. We brought in landlord licensing. That's improved the standards dramatically of the homes there, because they have to reach a standard. You can't have a license and have faulty gas fittings, faulty bathrooms, all that kind of stuff. But there was a voice of people who were not heard, the private renters. They weren't heard at all, and they were basically abused and victimised in reality. And the driver of homelessness in London is not family breakdown; it's actually evictions from the private rent sector. So bringing in licensing, which costs the landlord 96p a week, so not much money at all, when we first introduced it, created a bit of a stir of landlords, because in reality they'd have to fix so much more other bits of their homes to get it up to scratch. But it's having the courage of our convictions to tackle private interest groups and actually tackle that. That's what I think the state should be doing, and we in local government should be doing as well. I think some bad policy can come out of national government. For example, ballots on estates. It sounds a good idea, that we'll ballot everyone for estates, whether we want to actually demolish estates or rebuild estates. But actually, what it means is that if you do not commit to state funding of social homes at the same time, say we will actually increase homes, it actually disturbs what is eventually a very difficult situation, which is cross subsidies. You can't actually regenerate estates without cross subsidising. That means selling off bits of the state as well. So that will mean you can have the same quantum of social homes, but you'll have more private homes. You'll also, I think, have mixed estates, which I think we should all be in favour of. However, by the ideologically driven stuff is saying we have to have a ballot, and you see what's happened before in Tower Hamlets over the years. You'd have radical groups going in there and basically saying lying, say the council wants to demolish our homes, want to destroy, they want to drive you out, and that spreads fear. So what the actual practical results of say ballots of stuff is actually you're going to see less homes being built, because no estates will be regenerated, because it's too difficult. So I think that's the important element there of actually not being ideologically homebound, but actually listening and understanding. One thing I said, mentioned homelessness. We as a council have gone to partners with a big private company called Mears. We are basically hunting a joint venture, raising £80 million to buy homes over 400 across the borough, and also the neighbouring boroughs as well, to home our 2,400 homeless, TA. Now that's actually a really interesting, innovative public joint venture we're doing, because we're raising bonds, and eventually the homes will come back to us. We'll have washed the face. We'll make £200 million out of it in over 40 years, and we'll house homeless. So that's using and working with the private sector to actually innovate, to actually produce results. And I think that's the important thing as we centre-left politicians running councils, is to not be scared about saying that, and not be driven into this kind of, I think, which is very easily done, driven to a funnel where we have to only do things one way. We're scared of the private sector. We have to be ideological pure, because that's not the way, I think, forward for us. So that's where that's a little bit of what I think in terms of where we're being successful in local government and not being fearful. But I think it requires courage, though, and I think courage is a very difficult quantity to have, to do that, because the actual practical things in local Labour Party politics, especially in London, is that you've got people who are absolutely driven from outside the Labour Party, join the Labour Party, who have a different agenda. And they will drive local councillors out, moderate councillors out, and they have a fantasy world sometimes. And I was mentioned before, you can't set illegal budgets. We have to set, officers of the council would just resign. They wouldn't do that. It's impossible. You have to work with what you've got, and you have to innovate in this day. And also, in the last point, I think the point that Adam made about disconnect between in Barnet, the Jewish community, it's cost them the council. And I know how poor Barnet are on housing. And I know some of the Labour generations were terrible. And I worked very closely with I wish it was going to be a cabinet member for housing in Barnet, and I've been fortunate not, about some very innovative and interesting ways forward. We shared ideas, and Barnet came to Waltham Forest to ask us how we do things as well. But that disconnect with local people cost Barnet dear. And I think that's my final point is that people want things to work. People want things to actually get on their lives and live their lives, and things will work. But they also want to feel included, ignored, and having a participation. So we're very careful to have a growth commission in Waltham Forest, a life chances commission. We had a big manifesto consultation going around all the summer fairs and all the stuff that we do as a borough, just to make sure we're in touch with the people. So we don't necessarily listen to, I think, some of the so-called radical people who've taken over our parties, who try and shift the debate and make us lose touch with what people around us really, really want. And I think getting down to the actual ordinary people and listening to them is the way forward, I think. Thank you.
Questions in rounds of 3. So can we start off with the lady in the glasses towards the front? And can I also take, is a man in a blue shirt, there's a few rows behind you. Yeah. And can I also take the man in the white shirt from the right? Yeah.
All right. Don't worry. There we go. Sorry. Yeah. My name's Siobhan Coughlin. I'm Hammersmith and Fulham, and I've served as a councillor previously as well, and I work in local government. The answer to the question, Joanne, you summed it up nicely. The answer is obviously no. And my question back is, how can we help our colleagues in the Labour Party understand and tap into the resource and the expertise that there is in councils? Things that we could do which could help make that happen. Local government is seriously underrepresented in the NEC and other parts of the party, and that needs to be changed. We also need to tap into the expertise that we have in a lot of our MPs who are previous councillors or council leaders. Steve Reid, who's in Lambeth, Jim McMahon, Oldham, Catherine West, Ruth Cadbury. I can go on, the list is endless. Why are those people not being engaged and involved in helping us act as a bridge between what we do in local government, which quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, and I would say that is probably the most innovative efficient and effective part of the public sector, and it doesn't get the recognition, and it needs our own party to actually see what we have as a resource and to, as I said, tap into that to make sure that we better connect with our communities and we win seats and councils like Trafford, which is very similar to us in Hammersmith and Fulham. We've got that very, if you like, affluent demographic, but yet we won, and we won more seats. We did that because we are in touch with our local population. The National Party needs to learn from that.
Yeah, I agree with the previous speaker. I think if the average voter understood what councils really do, adult social care, crime prevention, youth services, etc., then more people would vote in local elections and more people would want to get involved. Secondly, it's really good to hear people talk about a private sector at a Labour Party event. I think we'd be a stronger part if we had more local business owners, more corporate managers as part of our membership. I think we should make a real effort to engage more of a private sector. Often we've been seen as shunning private enterprise. It's a shame. My main question is, I'm from Calder Valley CLP in West Yorkshire. In this afternoon, we've been talking about small towns. It's comprised of about 7 small towns and many villages as well. So it's not an urban area. It's wealthy, affluent, commuter town. Unemployment is about 2%. There's a lot of wealthy retirees, mostly white British with a Pakistani minority as well. I don't know if anyone has any advice from fighting council elections, maybe particularly Tom Beattie, how we can appeal to middle class, public sector, white collar professionals. There's not a student vote, there's not many 18 to 35s, it tends to be families and retirees.
Okay, and comes the gentleman in the white shirt.
Hello, my name is Dan. I come from Grantham and Stamford in rural heartland of Blue Land. I have to say I welcome what you said, Tom, because what's happening in Lincolnshire is very similar. Osborne first decided he wanted to make a mayor and put a load of money into that. We managed to fight that as the Labour group. They then now have this idea of making Lincolnshire a unitary authority. And we disagree with that. And you talk about, is the national policy Labour learning from that? Well, the answer is no, because there are lots of Labour members that think I'm bloody mental for saying we don't want that. Because they see that it's a good thing, moving services together, everything is one place. But they don't fundamentally understand about the nature of rural areas, and they don't understand that Lincolnshire is a big place. And until we actually learn the lessons and listen to our Labour voters and our Labour members, we're never going to win. We need to remember that actually stuff like public roads, roads is a public infrastructure. It is for the many, not the few. And we shouldn't have policies that basically take money away from the roads. We can't get away with that. We need to actually listen that people want their cars. And my question to you really ultimately is there ever going to be a space in the party without actually ultimately a rural Labour group set up by any member of the rural communities? Until we do that, I don't think we're ever going to have a voice.
Okay, Tom, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Dan, I think, yeah, it was from Stamford. Absolutely, I agree about the nature of unitary authorities. It seems to me that there is a tendency or a preference amongst some of our national politicians to see unitaries as a solution. I mean, I'm the Labour Vice Chair of the District Councils Network. Most district and borough councils are Conservative controlled. Most county councils are Conservative controlled. The County Councils Network is also Tory controlled. And my difficulty with the concept of a unitary authority in Northamptonshire, where I currently am, not the fact that I'm about to have my council wound up because of the incompetence of a Tory council down the road. It's just, where is the link? Where is the democratic link with the populace? Because we have a government, certainly the previous government, if not so much this government, but you mentioned George Osborne, and they talked at length about localism. They talked about devolving power away from Whitehall down to the lowest regions. They talked about directly elected mayors, but that's a different argument about whether those those types of positions are good or bad. And I think the jury probably still out there. But in terms of the democratic, deficit that creates, I mean, what we've been told is, well, fine, you can get rid of your district councils, you can create this unitary with a population of around about 330,000. We're now told is the figure which the government will accept as a minimum. It has to be in excess of 300,000, 330,000, but you can build town councils underneath that, and you can devolve power from the unitaries to town councils. So it doesn't seem to make a huge amount of sense. What they're talking about is doing away with two-tier local democracy in a county and increasing that the number of tiers. And I just don't think there's a huge amount of thought gone into it. I mean, I take the point about rural, understanding maybe of rural needs, and I know in the LGA there is a grouping of councillors from rural areas, but I mean, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, I don't think it's such a bad idea. And I think the other point I would pick up on at the beginning was how we help national colleagues, how we use the local government resource that we have in the Labour Party. And I think it's a significant resource. And I think we need to have better representation of councillors on the NEC for a start. I think it's outrageous that there are only 2 councillors there because they're councillors. I know there are other councillors who are on there, but they come from different constituencies. But to have 2 local authority representatives on the NEC, when councillors are the largest single contributors to the Labour Party's funds, we contribute more than the trade unions do. And how many members do the trade unions have on the NEC? And I speak as a former full-time trade union official. I've got nothing against my trade union colleagues, but should they have that disproportionate voice when people like ourselves and local government don't? So I'd like to see that type of thing. And that would stop, I think, the nonsense of the decision of the NEC to interfere in Haringey, which was a complete and utter disgrace what happened there. I don't claim to be an expert on the Haringey development vehicle, but what I am annoyed about is people on the NEC elected by very small numbers of people dictating to Labour groups about what they should and shouldn't do. And in my view, no rules were broken there by the Haringey Labour group. There was no law was being broken, and certainly there was no policy being ignored. So it really set a very dangerous precedent. I think that had we had better representation, and I think it's only because of Nick Forbes and Alice Perry that, in fact, the intervention was less harsh than it perhaps could have been. Sorry, I've probably gone on a bit too long there.
Joanne, do you want to go next?
Just a couple of points, really. So, Tom, you just mentioned devolution. Well, clearly in Greater Manchester, we are one of the test cases, if you like, for devolution. We have Andy Burnham as our elected Greater Manchester mayor, and he is hugely popular and swept the board in all the wards of Trafford. Even in the Leafy Hale suburbs, Andy Burnham came top, really. So, but you're absolutely right, the jury is still out. Because for me as a local councillor, it seems like another layer of bureaucracy, which I'm not fully involved in. So I found out that all the North West MPs were having a briefing on adult social care. So I contacted John Rouse, who's leading on Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, and said, well, that's wonderful that you're doing a briefing to all the North West MPs. However, I'm chair of the Health Scrutiny Committee in Trafford and have the shadow exec role for adult social care. Do you not think it might be important that I might be involved or have a briefing as a local councillor? So I had to email John, and he, good enough, he got in touch with me and said, yes, that's absolutely right. We can set up some of those briefings, but that should have been at the forefront of their minds to say that we should be part of those conversations, not an afterthought because a stroppy councillor decided to give him a prod. So I think the jury is most definitely still out on devolution. I think in relation to how we can influence, what Siobhan was saying really, how we can shape and influence things at a national level, I sit on the National Policy Forum for Labour, and it is so far removed from local government. We talk about things like they're up there, they're not translated to down there. And that is just incredibly disappointing. And where our local government as part of the democracy review? We've not been approached as local councillors to be fully engaged in the democracy review. It's almost like we're being sidelined. So there are things that we could do and should do to shape and influence. And finally, I think somebody mentioned about just protest. It just made me laugh, really, that local members coming to protest at a health scrutiny committee, local Labour Party members posting it on a Facebook page that they were coming to protest at a meeting that I was chairing. These meetings are held in public. Do you know, the doors open, come in. They've never once been to any of these meetings, but they think it's great to come and stand outside with a banner. That kind of behaviour is never helpful for local government representatives. So I think, you know, councillors need as many networks as we've got. We need to be standing together, shouting loud and proud. When I first joined the party, I thought national politics was the big thing. I thought it was really exciting. As a councillor for 7 years, I now know that actually it's us that are doing the groundwork. We're doing the work, and we deserve much more recognition than we get.
Yeah, I think I'll answer just the first question, because I'm not sure I'm qualified at all to answer the others. So as well as having just lost my seat, I was a shadow lead member for the opposition Labour group, and we were preparing for power. And we took the view that in order to prepare for power, we had to go and look at best practice. We heard before in terms of our visit to Waltham Forest. We visited Waltham Forest for housing, Newham to look at how Sir Robin Wells managed to completely reinvigorate the economy in Newham. We looked at Camden for housing as well. We looked at the environment in Hackney and also rubbish collection in Coventry. And for us, we knew that we've been out of power for a long time, and therefore we had very few councillors who had experience of governing. And therefore for us it was essential to try and learn and gain best practice, and to listen to advice from colleagues from elsewhere who've got real experience in running services. So I would hope that the Parliamentary Labour Party would take the same attitude. If we're serious about preparing for power, we need to go and learn from those who are in power, and that's where Labour local government are in power, doing some very innovative things, as we've already heard. What's not helpful is similar to what happened in Haringey, whereby the NEC decided to intervene. We had the pleasure of not knowing, but welcoming John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn to Barnet several times during the election campaign just gone. We didn't know about the visits. They didn't inform the councillors. But both of them came and they spoke, and they announced local policies on our behalf. So the key policy of Capita and Capita running Barnet Council, which we oppose, but there are ways in which we would have to deal with it if we're in power. They unilaterally announced to the media, to our trade unions and to others, that a Labour council will immediately scrap the contract. We'll just do it. Now, clearly, the implications of that is probably a discussion for another day, but the council would face heavy fines and probably would be stuck in a long legal battle and have its credit rating downgraded if we were to do so upon gaining power. But it was more, for me, it highlighted the disconnect, because as far as I was aware last week, the people of Barnet were given the choice of electing the local Labour group of councillors on our manifesto, and unfortunately we weren't consulted. So I think last week perhaps is a lesson as to how the leadership of the Labour Party should not engage with local governments.
Couple of things. About county unitaries, sort of these big authorities, I think Labour generally should have nothing to do with such things. There is always politics in local government reorganisation. The politics of creating a county unitary is to dilute and destroy red islands in county areas. I thought it was crackers, for instance, when the Labour government did this to Wiltshire. This removed any chance of sort of Labour having any influence over how anything in Wiltshire was governed. Salisbury District Council that had Labour as part of a coalition. There's always politics to it. There is this balance between democracy and efficiency, it seems, in terms of structure and so on. I'm not actually all that convinced that big authorities are more efficient than small ones, but that seems to be the attitude. The other thing with big authorities is that they lack accountability. You've got great big wards with sort of thousands and thousands of people on it, and you do lose it. And then you get sort of capers like the Conservative group in Northamptonshire did. They thought it was a great idea to cut their number of councillors, and it didn't seem to be a particularly good way of creating good local government. I'd much prefer, if it is efficient to run services in larger units, there is an organic way of doing it, which I think Tom mentioned earlier, about grouping services with neighbouring local authorities. And there's no particular party politics in that I think he works with Conservative neighbour authorities. There's authorities like Ada and Worthing that group them together. It can be difficult. I see my Hammersmith and Fulham friends muttering. It can be problematic in some cases, I will grant you. Yeah. So that seems a better way of doing it, and I think this drive to unitaries is incredibly short-sighted and politically suicidal, really. In terms of the rural areas, let's look at the history here. Labour has always struggled in rural areas. It was the bit of the Labour coalition that hadn't got sort of quite put into place in the 1920s when party sort of allegiances froze, as it were. The Labour countryside has always been odd countryside, mostly coal mining areas historically. As the mining industry and its legacy disappear, a lot of those constituencies are the ones that have swung heaviest to the Tories over the last 30 years. We've always struggled. Bits of countryside where we do well are either because we've got extraordinary hard-working people locally. I seem to remember in Lincolnshire there was a chap called Phil Dilks who was able to win astonishing victories in... That is a shame. He was a legend, I believe, in and also the other sort of country areas we win are still odd countryside. You've got a couple of examples in Calder Valley. Hebden Bridge and Todmorden are not kind of your standard rural towns. And it's those sorts of places, and I mean, if you don't know the area, sort of like Stroud, where people, it's a sort of, they're the sort of Stroud of the north, where you get sort of people pursuing kind of going back to nature, alternative lifestyle, and often the Greens and Labour do quite well in those sort of environments. So I think it's something we have to either give all the sort of support and assistance we can to these exceptional individuals who can win in normal countryside, and also engage and sort of represent and bring into local politics the kind of the hippie bits, as it were, of rural England.
Okay. And again, last but not least, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. I mean, besides Phil Dilks, I knew Phil Dilks. He used to be a London Labour press officer whilst being a Lincolnshire council. He wore two hats with great skill. But I just answer the point about the corporate element to like running councils. And councils are a multi-million-pound organisation. They are, I mean, as I mentioned before, we've had £100 million taken away by the government. So you have to innovate. You have to be able to, cut. You can't see the private sector as the enemy. You have to see the private sector as partners, and you have to be able to work with partners, not reluctantly, but wholeheartedly. But this, I mean, it's going back to my earlier point about the state being an enabler, the state having control, but not necessarily ownership. It's how you shape the contracts, how you shape the results, and how you have scrutiny and stakeholders by residents, as also by the council officers and by members as well. And members, I think, again, members are incredibly important, councils are incredibly important in playing that role in then shaping it. So moving forwards, I think we you know, when we mentioned the Haringey development vehicle and how, besides the rights and wrongs of it and the NEC intervening, which is again a dangerous precedent in there, but we shouldn't be scared of how we do things, and certainly in Waltham Forest we certainly will be entering joint ventures. Again, but we will look very carefully at it, and we'll look very carefully about what the results will be, what the controls are, what the council's risk should be, what's at stake. It's those sort of like, you know, intricate bits of local government that actually, as local government, as councillors, we kind of like that stuff. We want to get involved, we want to know, we want to make sure, because at the end of the day, it is about one thing for me personally: how are the residents going to benefit from it? Will it make the lives of my residents better by actually doing X, Y, Z through this route, with a partnership with the private sector, or through another route, which is not do it ourselves? And in reality, we can't. I mentioned before about you'll hear radical housing groups say, well, we will build thousands new council homes if we control the councils. In reality, we are capped by debt caps by government. We can't do that. When you have regeneration projects or housing development projects going through, and you're seeing quantum is much less of social homes, well, actually, this is because of part of the mayor's about the affordable housing programme, which the government gives to the mayor gives to us, but with lots of strings attached. Effectively, you can only build social affordable homes, not social homes, with the money that's attached to it. So those are the intricate things. So we can campaign in poetry, if you like, and some people campaign very loudly in poetry, rhetorically, but in reality, you have to be able to sort of rule in prose, and you have to be able to kind of govern in prose, and that's an incredibly important thing. And that means having an intelligent, kind of results-orientated approach to how we do things in our government.
Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for more questions, so can we thank all of our wonderful panellists.